On July 26, 1948, President Harry Truman issued two executive orders, number 9980 and number 9981. The first ordered the desegregation of the federal workforce. The second, the desegregation of America's military. With two strokes of his pen, President Truman made civil rights history. Order 9981 stated, "It is hereby declared to be the policy of the President that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin." That had certainly not been the case prior to this moment. Even though people of color had served courageously for America's military beginning in the American Revolution, once the United States became a nation, that service had been in segregated units. In this video, we'll explore the significance of Truman's action through three historic perspectives. First, by looking back at America just prior to 1948, as Thaddeus Adolphus Watson shares his memories of serving in the segregated army during World War II, and we learn how he and other returning black soldiers began expecting better from their country. Second, through the perspective of President Truman himself, in stories shared by his grandnephew, John Ross Truman. And third, through examples of the impact created by Truman's policy. In the early 1940s, Thaddeus Adolphus Watson was living in St. Louis with his wife and family when he was drafted into the segregated U.S. Army. Correspondent Cordell Whitlock shares his story.
In 1944, Watson, by now the father of three, was drafted into the United States Army. America's military was not exempt from the world of Jim Crow.
In World War II, the United States had two armies, a black army and a white army. You understand that?
As Watson went through basic training, preparing to fight for a country that practiced intolerance based on ignorance, the question would always come up: how can you fight for a nation where the color of your skin dictates so much? Watson's thoughts on the matter spoke volumes about his character and integrity.
I tell you, one day we would sit down with our white brothers and talk with them and try to make them understand this is the only home we know anything about now.
This was your home?
This is our home.
Winter 1944 was fast approaching, and the future of mankind hung in the balance. As the Allies prepared to fight what would prove to be the decisive battles in World War II, black soldiers faced the unthinkable. As if the Waffen-SS and Luftwaffe weren't enough to worry about, African Americans had to deal with even more hostility from their own countrymen.
The white soldiers hated us so bad.
American soldiers?
Yeah, American soldiers.
How did they treat you?
We fought.
Physically?
Yeah.
But Watson and countless other African Americans answered the call to duty, and in late 1944, the 351st found themselves in the Ardennes Forest in northeast France. The Battle of the Bulge was fought in brutal conditions as the Germans launched their last blitzkrieg. 75 years later, a man who was there, a man who fought bravely under the American flag, still has difficulty talking about the experience.
It's just like a nightmare. You ever had a nightmare and you wake up that morning and you didn't believe it happened? That was the beginning.
The 351st more than held their own as the Allies beat back the Germans. Private First Class Watson earned 2 Bronze Stars for his service. The hero's welcome for America's troops only told part of the story. As he headed home, Watson asked a friend if the war would change white America's view on segregation. The answer was sobering.
They're gonna feel like they owe you something, and they ain't gonna want to give it to you.
Watson returned to an America as segregated as ever, but he, other soldiers, and many other Americans began to call for a change. In a celebrated case taken up by the American Civil Liberties Union, Winfred Lynn, a black landscape gardener from New York, went to jail after he told his local draft board he would, quote, not be compelled to serve in a unit undemocratically selected as a Negro. At a hearing before the Senate Armed Services Committee, A. Philip Randolph, pioneering union organizer and civil rights leader, said, I personally will advise Negroes to refuse to fight as slaves for a democracy they cannot possess and cannot enjoy. When the beatings and murders of recently returned African-American World War II veterans in the South captured national attention, Truman was moved to act. My stomach turned over, he said, when I learned that Negro soldiers just back from overseas were being dumped out of army trucks in Mississippi and beaten. Whatever my inclinations as a native of Missouri might have been, as president, I know this is bad. I shall fight to end evils like this. In response to the lynchings and under pressure from black civil rights groups, Truman formed the President's Committee on Civil Rights in late 1946. It produced a report to secure these rights, which condemned all forms of segregation and asked for an immediate end to discrimination and segregation in all branches of the armed services. That reference to his native Missouri gives us a peek into the world Harry Truman grew up in, a world where his grandparents had owned slaves and a mother openly reviled abolitionism and Abraham Lincoln. But as his grandnephew John Ross Truman tells us, by the time he became a U.S. Senator, Truman had acquired a larger worldview.
Uncle Harry came from a border state. His ancestors, and therefore mine, had owned slaves. But he, in 1940, running for the Senate in Sedalia, Missouri, to a nearly all-white audience, said, I believe in the brotherhood of all men, not just white men, before the law. That was a radical thing to say in that time and that place. And he did give the first presidential speech to the NAACP, and it was the strongest statement for civil rights of any president since Abraham Lincoln. And then he sent a civil rights message to Congress, the first one. It was not well received. You could say the reception was disastrous. And I don't think it surprised him. But being President Truman, a few months later, he issues executive orders in spite of the outcry as to everything he'd said and done before. He based his executive order desegregating the armed forces on his power under the constitutional laws as president, but also as commander-in-chief. And the text says, it is hereby declared to be the policy of the president that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, or national origin. This policy shall be put into effect as rapidly as possible. People forget about it, but the same day he signed another executive order which desegregated federal civil service. And the quote there is, he orders that all personnel actions, in all such actions there shall be no discrimination because of race, color, religion, or national origin. With 2 signatures, President Truman did more for African Americans than any president had done since Abraham Lincoln. You wouldn't expect it from one of his background, but that's a story of growth in the presidency. I'm very proud of what he did. And it's hard now to realize how epical and earth-shaking those things were.
In spite of the order's wording that the policy shall be put into effect as rapidly as possible, reform in the military would take a few years. The Air Force was the first to integrate, followed by the Navy. In 1949, Wesley A. Brown became its first black officer. The Army and Marines moved more slowly, but in October 1951, the last Buffalo Soldier unit of the Army was inactivated and its soldiers reassigned to integrated units. In 1952, the Marine Corps gradually integrated units to offset losses in the Korean War. Since its inception, the impact of Truman's policy can be seen in ways both large and small. In 1998, on the 50th anniversary of the order, General Colin Powell spoke about the impact of Truman's decision on his life.
It was the only place when I was coming out of college only institution in all of America, because of Harry Truman, the only institution in America where a young black kid could now dream. At 21, I could dream the dream I dare not think about at age 11. It's the one place where the only thing that counted was courage, where the color of your guts and the color of your blood was more important than the color of your skin.
John Ross Truman tells the story of what James Earl Jones said to him when he was Master of Ceremonies in 2000, when the State Department headquarters building was officially renamed the Harry S. Truman Building.
He told me that he had gotten up at 3 in the morning from someplace in the Deep South to be there for this. But he also explained that it meant a lot to him because he had served as an officer in the Army, integrated by order of my uncle, and it changed his life. He wanted to be there for President Truman because President Truman had been there for him.
And in 2023, on the 75th anniversary of the order, United States Secretary of Defense and retired U.S. Army General Lloyd Austin summed up the legacy of Truman's actions this way.
Americans of all backgrounds have bravely served in the U.S. military throughout our country's history. But for far too long, black troops and other service members of color were forced to serve in segregated units. They fought in combat even as they battled discrimination at home. Finally, on July 26, 1948, President Truman ordered equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed forces without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. Our military has made tremendous progress since then. Today, some 44% of our active duty force are people of color. And Americans from all walks of life serve alongside one another, and they grow as leaders, and they contribute to our military at the highest levels. Our outstanding military is the strongest fighting force on earth because it draws on the full talents of all of our citizens. That's the American way, one nation, indivisible. So on this important anniversary, let's continue the noble work of those who ended segregation. Let's hold true to the values that make America a beacon. And let's keep working together to make America stronger and safer and our world more secure.